They called him the perfect husband, a millionaire tech genius, charming, generous, admired by everyone in the city. But behind closed doors, he was a monster. One night after a charity gala, his pregnant wife didn't make it home. She was found unconscious, beaten into a coma, and the police called it an accident. For months, the city moved on. The headlines faded. But her two brothers didn't. They started digging. And what they found didn't just expose one man, it exposed an entire system built to protect the powerful. Hidden files, secret recordings, payoffs, judges, cops, all part of the same machine. Until the day the truth hit the city like a bomb. This isn't just a story of revenge. It's a story of justice, delivered in the most unexpected way. The breaking news alert flashed across every screen in Los Angeles at 11:37 p.m. on a Tuesday in October. Tech billionaire Marcus Brennan's wife found unconscious in their Beverly Hills estate. Police are calling it a tragic accident. In the ICU waiting room of Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, two brothers sat watching the broadcast with identical expressions of cold fury. James Coleman, 38, still wore his courtroom suit, tie loosened and askew. Owen Coleman, 35, had his journalist notebook gripped so tightly the pages were crumpling. On the screen, Marcus Brennan stood outside the hospital entrance. Designer suit, grief-stricken face, calculated tears rolling down his cheeks as the cameras flashed. "My wife Sarah is my entire world," Marcus said, voice breaking perfectly on cue. "This terrible accident. I'm praying for a miracle. Please give us privacy during this difficult time." Owen threw his coffee cup at the television. It bounced off harmlessly, but the gesture said everything. "They're already rewriting the story," he said. James didn't take his eyes off the screen. "Then we burned the script." That vow, spoken in a hospital waiting room with their sister fighting for her life 3 floors above them, would terrorize an entire city before it was finished. But to understand how two brothers brought a billionaire to his knees, you have to understand how perfectly Marcus Brennan had constructed his lie. 6 months earlier, Sarah Coleman had been the picture of happiness. At least that's what the photographs showed. The charity galas, the magazine spreads, the social media posts of her and Marcus, the golden couple of Los Angeles tech royalty. Marcus had built ClearSight AI from nothing, turning facial recognition software into a $2 billion empire. He was 41, handsome, philanthropic. Every year he donated millions to worthy causes, hospitals, schools, women's shelters. The irony of that last one would later make Sarah's brothers want to vomit. Sarah was 32, a former nonprofit director who'd given up her career when she married Marcus 3 years earlier. He'd convinced her it was what she wanted, that she could do more good as his partner than running her small organization. The truth was simpler and more sinister. Marcus needed control more than he needed love. It started small, a grip on her arm that left bruises hidden under long sleeves. "You smiled at him too long," Marcus would say, referencing some innocent interaction at a party, his voice calm, his eyes dead. Then her phone mysteriously fell in the pool. "I'll get you a new one," Marcus had said. "I'll set it up for you." Which meant monitored, controlled. Her best friend Rachel stopped coming around after Marcus made it clear she wasn't welcome. "She's poisoning you against me," he'd told Sarah. "Choose." Sarah chose wrong. She chose silence. By month 8 of her pregnancy, Sarah Coleman Brennan was a prisoner in a $12 million house. Every bank card frozen, every friend alienated, every escape route sealed. She was 7 months pregnant when she finally found the courage to call the domestic violence hotline from her bathroom, whispering into the phone while Marcus was in a meeting. Detective Kate Wilson took the report, photographed the bruises, filed an official complaint. Case number DVV 2024-4782. 48 hours later, the case vanished from the system. Marcus's attorney, Richard Hayes, had made 3 phone calls. The report disappeared. Detective Wilson was reassigned. The photographs were deleted. "I'm so sorry," Kate told Sarah in a brief, forbidden phone call. "It's out of my hands." Sarah understood then. No one could help her. Marcus owned the silence of everyone who mattered. The night it happened, Marcus was hosting a dinner party for investors. Sarah, 7 months pregnant and exhausted, played the perfect hostess. She smiled. She charmed. She served wine with shaking hands. Then she spilled a glass on a guest's jacket. It was an accident, a simple, human mistake. Marcus's smile never wavered, but his eyes went black. Sweetheart, let's get you cleaned up. After the guests left, he took her down to the wine cellar. You humiliated me, he said, in front of partners. It was an accident. Accidents have consequences. What happened next would land Sarah in a coma with a 15% chance of survival. James Coleman got the call at 3 in the morning. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. Is this James Coleman, Sarah Brennan's brother? Yes. Who is this? This is Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. Your sister has been admitted. You need to come now. James called Owen from the car. By the time they both arrived at the hospital, police tape was already up and press were swarming the entrance. A uniformed officer stopped them at the door. Family only. We're her brothers, James said, showing ID. The officer's expression shifted. Pity. 4th floor, ICU. I'm sorry. They took the elevator in silence. Neither brother spoke. Neither could. Dr. Rachel Morrison met them outside Sarah's room. She was young, competent, invisibly shaken. I need to be direct with you, she said. Your sister's injuries are not consistent with a fall. James felt his blood go cold. What are you saying? Pattern of bruising, defensive wounds, blunt force trauma to the head and torso, and these aren't the first injuries. X-rays show multiple old fractures, ribs, wrist. Someone's been beating her for a long time. Owen's hands clenched into fists. Where is he? Where's Marcus? Giving a statement to police, he says she fell down the marble staircase. That's a lie, James Bowman said. His prosecutor's brain was already assembling evidence, timelines, witness lists. We need to see her. What they saw would haunt them forever. Sarah lay motionless in a nest of tubes and wires. Machines beeped steadily, keeping her alive. Her face, usually so vibrant, was swollen and bruised. Both eyes blackened. A ventilator breathed for her. We had to perform an emergency cesarean section, Dr. Morrison said quietly. The baby's alive. 3 pounds, 2 ounces. We're calling her Emma. She's in the NICU fighting hard. And Sarah? Owen's voice cracked. Medically induced coma, severe brain swelling. We're doing everything we can, but Dr. Morrison hesitated. You should prepare yourselves. The next 72 hours are critical. James found Sarah's purse in the corner, sealed in an evidence bag. Inside was a small journal. The last entry, dated 3 days earlier, was written in shaky handwriting. If I don't survive, please know I loved my baby, and I was so scared. Owen read over his shoulder. When he looked up, his eyes were dry but burning with something dangerous. He did this, Owen said, and he's going to pay. We need proof, James said. He was already thinking like a prosecutor. Evidence that will stick. He's a billionaire with unlimited resources. We can't just accuse him. Then we get proof that they made a pact in that hospital room, standing over their sister's broken body while her daughter fought for life 3 floors down. James would work within the system, file motions, build a legal case, do it by the book. Owen would work outside it, investigate, expose, burn down Marcus's empire brick by brick if he had to. Neither brother knew then that they'd end up doing both, that they'd have to break every rule they believed in to get justice, that their revenge would terrorize a city, but they were about to learn. Downstairs, Marcus Brennan was giving another performance. Designer stubble, artful tears, a voice that trembled at exactly the right moments. Sarah is my everything. This accident has devastated me. I just want her to wake up. I want our daughter to meet her mother. Then he announced a $5 million donation to domestic violence prevention. The hashtag Pray for Sarah trended worldwide within 20 minutes. And Marcus Brennan, the man who'd beaten his pregnant wife into a coma, was hailed as a grieving hero. The first roadblock came within 24 hours. James walked into the district attorney's office with a file folder 3 inches thick. Evidence, doctor's reports, Sarah's journal, Detective Wilson's original report that he'd managed to obtain through a sympathetic clerk. District Attorney Gerald Robbins barely looked at it. Marcus Brennan is a respected philanthropist, Robbins said, sliding the folder back across his desk. He's donated to this city, built hospitals, funded schools. You're talking about prosecuting him for domestic violence based on what? A tragic accident and some old injuries that could have happened anywhere. My sister's in a coma, James said. His voice was dangerously quiet. Her injuries show a pattern of long-term abuse. Without her testimony, you have nothing. And even if she wakes up, defense will argue she's traumatized, confused, unreliable. Hayes will tear her apart on cross-examination. I'm not wasting taxpayer money on a case I can't win. So he just gets away with it? Robbins had the decency to look uncomfortable. I didn't say that. I said we can't prosecute, not yet. If you get me something concrete, something undeniable, we'll revisit it. James left the DA's office, understanding something fundamental about power. The law protected people like Marcus Brennan. Money didn't just buy good lawyers, it bought silence, compliance, the benefit of every doubt. Owen was hitting his own walls. He tracked down 3 of Marcus's ex-girlfriends. Only had signed non-disclosure agreements. All had the same story. All were terrified to speak. The first, Jessica, met him in a parking garage, looking over her shoulder every few seconds. He broke my jaw, she whispered. Said if I ever talked, I'd never work in this city again. He has connections everywhere. I'll protect you, Owen promised. Jessica laughed bitterly. You can't protect anyone from Marcus Brennan. He owns half the city. Do you know how many politicians are in his pocket? How many judges? How many cops? She walked away before Owen could respond. But Owen wasn't done. He spent his own money, called in every favor. Finally got security footage from a building with a camera facing the Brennan estate. The timestamp showed 11:47 p.m. on the night of the attack. Marcus's car pulling into the driveway. Marcus dragging Sarah's unconscious body from the passenger seat into the house. Owen delivered the footage to the police personally. 3 days later, he got a call. The file was corrupted. Hardware malfunction. No way to recover it. Owen sat in his apartment, surrounded by dead ends and deleted evidence, and understood what his sister had tried to tell them. Marcus didn't just own a company. He owned the silence of an entire city. At the hospital, baby Emma crashed. Owen was there when the alarm started screaming. Nurses ran. Doctors shouted medical terminology he didn't understand. She's not breathing. Get the crash cart. Starting compressions. 40 minutes of resuscitation. 40 minutes of Owen pacing in a waiting room, making deals with a god he didn't believe in. Emma survived, barely. That night, Owen and James met at a bar neither of them remembered choosing. The system's not going to help us, Owen said. He was on his 3rd whiskey. Every door I knock on slams in my face. Then we stopped knocking, James said. Owen looked at his brother. James had always been the rule follower, the one who believed in justice and procedure and doing things the right way. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe the system's broken. Maybe it's time we fix it ourselves. This was the moment that would define everything that came after. 2 brothers, sitting in a dark bar, deciding that sometimes justice requires breaking the rules you spent your life upholding. Some people would later call what they did noble. Others would call it vigilante justice. Owen called it survival. So what's the plan? He asked. James pulled out his phone. On the screen was a photo of Marcus's head of marketing, Vanessa Clark, 29, ambitious, and according to office gossip, Marcus's mistress. We find the people he's hurt, the ones who know what he really is, and we convince them to talk. And if they won't, James's expression was cold, then we make them. Vanessa Clark had always prided herself on being smart enough to play the game. She was Marcus's head of marketing, brilliant at her job, and yes, his mistress. She'd rationalized it easily enough. Sarah seemed fine. It was just business. Marcus was going to leave her eventually anyway. Vanessa told herself these lies for 8 months. Then she got pregnant, 8 weeks along when she took the test. She hadn't told Marcus yet, wasn't sure she would, because lately she'd started seeing things that made her skin crawl. The way Marcus's charm could snap off like a light switch. The way Staff flinched when he raised his voice. The small, cruel comments about Sarah that he passed off as jokes. My wife doesn't understand me, he'd say. She's fragile, needs careful handling. Vanessa was starting to understand what careful handling meant. The night Sarah ended up in the hospital, Marcus called Vanessa at 2 a.m. "I need you at the office, crisis management." She went, helped craft a statement, watched him practice his grief-stricken expression in the mirror until it looked natural. "You're good at this," she'd said, meaning the PR. "I'm good at everything," Marcus had replied, and the way he said it made her blood run cold. That's when Vanessa started recording their conversations. She told herself it was insurance, protection, maybe leverage if things went south. The recording that would later destroy Marcus came 3 days after Sarah was hospitalized. Marcus was drunk, celebrating. Donations were pouring in. His stock price was up. The press loved him. "You say you value control," Vanessa said carefully. She had her phone recording in her purse. "What about when someone says no?" Marcus leaned back in his chair. "Some people need to be corrected." Sarah never understood that. She kept pushing back, kept threatening to leave. His voice went flat. "I just needed her quiet." "What did you do?" "What I had to." She fell. That's the story. Vanessa felt ice in her stomach. This was a confession to attempted murder from a man who thought he was untouchable. She started copying files that night. Evidence of bribes Marcus had paid, police reports that had been deleted, NDA payments to 7 different women. She thought she was being careful. She wasn't careful enough. Marcus's security team monitored everything. Every computer, every phone, every keystroke. He confronted her in his office on a Friday afternoon. "You think you can betray me?" His voice was soft, deadly. "I don't know what you're talking about." He grabbed her by the throat, slammed her against the wall. Vanessa felt something crack in her ribs. "I own you," Marcus said. "I own everyone. You want to know what happens to people who cross me? Ask Sarah." "Oh, wait, you can't. She's in a coma." The beating lasted 5 minutes. Vanessa lost the baby. She woke up in a private hospital room with Richard Hayes sitting next to her bed. "You're going to sign this NDA, Hayes said, sliding papers across the table. "You're going to take the $2 million settlement, and you're going to disappear. Because if you don't, your father has a very unfortunate accident. Understand?" Vanessa understood. She signed with a broken hand, then she vanished. But before she left Los Angeles, she uploaded every file she'd copied to an encrypted server. Sent the password to an anonymous email account, insurance. Because Vanessa Clark had learned something that Sarah already knew. Marcus Brennan was a monster, and monsters needed to be destroyed. 2 weeks after Sarah was hospitalized, Marcus Brennan walked into family court wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than most people's cars. His lawyers carried briefcases full of character references, financial statements, and carefully crafted narratives. James Coleman sat at the opposing table with a file folder and rage he could barely contain. The hearing for emergency custody of Emma Brennan was scheduled for 9 a.m. on a Monday. Judge Patricia Carson presided, a stern woman in her 60s with a reputation for fairness. James would later learn that reputation was purchased and paid for. Marcus's lead attorney, Richard Hayes, stood and delivered his opening statement with the practiced ease of a man who'd never lost a case he cared about winning. "Your Honor, my client is a devoted father facing an unimaginable tragedy. His wife, through no fault of his own, is incapacitated and unable to care for their newborn daughter. Mr. Brennan has the resources, the stability, and the love necessary to provide Emma with the best possible care during this difficult time." Hayes presented letters of recommendation from 3 senators, 2 hospital administrators, and the mayor of Los Angeles, all praising Marcus's character, his philanthropy, his dedication to family values. James stood for his turn. He had Sarah's medical records, Dr. Morrison's statement about the injuries being inconsistent with a fall, the disappeared police report that he'd managed to obtain through back channels. "Your Honor, my sister's injuries show a clear pattern of domestic violence. There's evidence that Mr. Brennan—" "Objection," Hayes interrupted smoothly. "Speculation and defamation. Mr. Coleman is not presenting facts. He's making baseless accusations against a grieving husband." Judge Carson nodded. "Sustained. Mr. Coleman, do you have concrete evidence of abuse, police reports, arrests, convictions?" James felt his case crumbling. "The police report was deleted from the system, Your Honor. But I have testimony from the detective who took the original, hearsay, Do you have the actual report? It was destroyed. Then you have nothing admissible. Carson's tone was final. The hearing lasted 45 minutes. James presented everything he had. Dr. Morrison testified about Sarah's injuries. Kate Wilson, risking her job, testified about the disappeared evidence. Hayes demolished them both on cross-examination. Dr. Morrison, is it possible these injuries resulted from a fall down a marble staircase? It's possible, but unlikely. Possible is all we need. Detective Wilson, you claim a report existed but was deleted. Can you produce this report? No, but I saw it. I took the photographs myself. Can you produce the photographs? They were deleted from the system. So you have no physical evidence, just your word against departmental records showing no such report ever existed. Kate's face went red. Because someone destroyed the records, or because the report never existed in the first place. Judge Carson rendered her decision at 11:15 a.m. Based on the evidence presented, or rather the lack thereof, I find no credible reason to deny Mr. Brennan custody of his biological daughter. Custody is awarded to the father, with visitation rights for the mother's family to be determined when and if Mrs. Brennan regains consciousness. James wanted to overturn the table. Instead, he filed an immediate appeal, knowing it was futile. He watched Marcus carry Emma out of the courthouse. The press was waiting. Cameras flashed. Marcus held Emma carefully, his expression perfectly crafted grief and determination. I'll protect her, Marcus said to the cameras, just as I tried to protect her mother. This family has suffered enough. The photos were everywhere by evening. Devoted father, tragic circumstances, a man doing his best in impossible situations. 3 days later, Marcus filed for divorce. James got the notice by courier. He read it 3 times, unable to believe what he was seeing. Dissolution of marriage for an incapacitated spouse. It was legal in California under specific circumstances. Rare, but legal. Marcus was divorcing Sarah while she lay in a coma, unable to consent, unable to fight back. Hayes had found the loophole and driven a truck through it. James filed an emergency motion to block it, argued that Sarah deserved representation, that she had rights even while incapacitated. Judge Carson denied the motion. The divorce was granted in 30 days. Marcus was legally free to remarry if he wanted, free to control every narrative, free to erase Sarah from his life while she lay unconscious in a hospital bed. Owen Coleman had been holding himself together through sheer willpower. The custody decision broke something inside him. He found Marcus outside the courthouse after the divorce hearing. Press everywhere. Security guards flanking Marcus like he was royalty. You murdered her, Owen shouted. He shoved Marcus hard enough to make him stumble. Everyone knows it. You beat your wife into a coma and you're walking free. Security grabbed Owen immediately. Marcus straightened his tie, smiled for the cameras. I understand Mr. Coleman is grieving, Marcus said, voice dripping with false sympathy. But these baseless accusations are slander. My lawyers will be filing charges. Owen was arrested on the spot, assault, disturbing the peace. 48 hours later, he was served with a civil lawsuit, $50 million for defamation, harassment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The lawsuit detailed every accusation Owen had made, every article he'd tried to publish, every social media post, building a case that Owen Coleman was conducting a vendetta against an innocent man. James tried to help, but the Bar Association was already investigating him. Conflict of interest, they said, representing his sister while making accusations against her husband without evidence, conduct unbecoming, potential ethics violations. Within a week, James was suspended from practicing law for 60 days pending a full investigation. The brothers had lost everything. Sarah, in a coma, divorced, stripped of parental rights. Emma, in Marcus's custody, a prop for his public image. Owen, arrested, being sued for everything he had. James, disbarred, powerless to help anyone. The system they'd trusted had failed them completely. The city believed Marcus's lies. The press painted Owen as a grieving brother gone mad. James as a lawyer who'd lost his objectivity. That night, James sat alone in his apartment. Every surface was covered with files, evidence, dead ends. He'd given up drinking years ago, but he was seriously reconsidering that decision. The news played on mute. Marcus was giving another interview, talking about forgiveness, about healing, about honoring Sarah's memory. Sarah wasn't dead, but Marcus was already eulogizing her, rewriting history, making himself the victim. James understood then what true powerlessness felt like. He'd spent 15 years as a prosecutor, believing in justice, believing the system worked if you followed the rules. He'd been naive. The powerful didn't follow rules. They bought new ones. His phone rang. Unknown number? He almost didn't answer. Mr. Coleman, this is Dr. Morrison at Cedars-Sinai. You need to come to the hospital immediately. James's heart stopped. Is Sarah? She's waking up. James was out the door before Morrison finished the sentence. 38 hours. That's how long they had before Marcus's scheduled termination of Sarah's life support. Sarah's eyes had opened just in time, but as James raced through red lights toward the hospital, he didn't know if that would be enough to save her, or if waking up would just mean Sarah had to face the horror of everything she'd lost while she was gone. Sarah's eyes opened at 3:17 a.m. on a Thursday morning. The first thing she saw was machines, beeping monitors, IV lines, sterile white ceiling tiles. The second thing she saw was James asleep in a chair beside her bed, file folders scattered across his lap. She tried to speak, but her throat was raw from the ventilator. The sound came out as a croak. James jerked awake. For a moment, he just stared like he was seeing a ghost. Sarah, she managed to nod. Tears were already streaming down her face. James hit the call button. She's awake. My sister's awake. Within minutes, the room filled with doctors and nurses, checking vitals, shining lights in her eyes, asking questions. Do you know where you are? Sarah nodded. Hospital. Do you know what happened? Her hand went to her stomach. Flat now, empty. Emma, she whispered. My baby. Dr. Morrison squeezed her hand gently. Emma's alive, Sarah. She's beautiful. 3 months old now. Fighting hard. Relief crashed over Sarah like a wave, then horror. Marcus, where? The doctors exchanged glances. James leaned close. He can't hurt you anymore. You're safe here. But Sarah knew better. Marcus was never far away. Marcus always found a way. Over the next hour, James and Owen explained everything. The custody hearing, the divorce, the deleted evidence. The walls they'd hit at every turn. Sarah listened in growing despair. He won, she said. Her voice was hollow. He beat me, and he still won. Not yet, Owen said. He pulled out his phone, showed her a video. It was Marcus on a podcast. Owen's podcast. The one Owen had arranged as an ambush. Sarah watched her husband unravel on camera, watched him scream about control and correction. Watched the mask crack. He's scared, she whispered. For the first time since waking, there was something besides fear in her voice. I've never seen him scared before. Owen leaned forward. We can use that, but we need you, Sarah. We need you to testify, to tell your story. Sarah's panic attack was immediate, heart rate spiking, monitors alarming, nurses rushing back in. I can't, she gasped between breaths. You don't understand. He'll destroy me. He destroys everyone. I'm not strong enough. James held her hand while Morrison administered a sedative. You don't have to decide now, James said softly. Rest, heal. We'll figure this out. But they didn't have time. Marcus's lawyers were already filing motions to terminate Sarah's parental rights permanently, to have her declared mentally incompetent. They needed a miracle. They got 3. The first miracle came from Owen's relentless investigation. He'd been tracking Vanessa Clark for 2 weeks. Marcus's former mistress had vanished after the attack, but Owen was good at finding people who didn't want to be found. He traced her through 3 states, finally tracked her to Atlantic City, hiding in an apartment above an Italian restaurant. The apartment belonged to her father. Frank Clark answered the door with a gun in his hand. He was 65, built like a linebacker with eyes that had seen too much violence to be impressed by threats. Who the hell are you? Owen Coleman, I need to talk to your daughter. She's not talking to anyone. I'm Sarah Brennan's brother. Sarah's the woman Marcus put in a coma. Frank's expression shifted slightly. I know who Sarah is. Get inside before someone sees you. The apartment was small but clean. Vanessa sat on a couch, one arm in a sling. healing bruises on her face. She looked up when Owen entered and flinched. "I'm not here to hurt you," Owen said quickly. "I'm here because we both want the same thing, to destroy Marcus Brennan." Vanessa laughed bitterly. "You can't destroy him. He owns half the city." "Owned," Owen corrected. "Past tense. His empire's cracking, but we need your help to finish it." For 3 hours, Owen laid out everything. The evidence they had, the evidence they needed, what Vanessa's testimony could do. Frank listened from the kitchen, cleaning a pistol with methodical precision. Finally, he spoke. "You want my daughter to testify? Put a target on her back? What's in it for us?" Owen had expected this. Marcus loses everything. Not just his freedom, his money, his reputation, his legacy. Everything he cares about gets burned to the ground. "Everything means everything," Frank said. "She wants witness protection, new identity, and 20% of whatever assets get seized." James, who joined Owen for the meeting, bristled. "That's extortion." "That's the price of justice," Frank shot back. "My daughter lost a baby because of him. Nearly died. You think testimony is cheap?" Owen and James exchanged glances. This was the line. Once crossed, there was no going back. James took a breath. "We'll make it happen." Vanessa opened a locked box. Inside was a flash drive. "Everything's on here," she said. "The recording of him confessing. Financial records proving bribes to judges and police. NDAs from 7 other women he paid off. Evidence he had people destroy police reports." She handed it to Owen like she was passing him a live grenade. "I helped a monster," Vanessa said quietly. "Now I'll bury him." Boy. The second miracle came from Detective Kate Wilson. She showed up at James's apartment at midnight, carrying a file box. "I kept copies," she said. "Everything they made me delete. The original report, the photographs, Sarah's statement, all of it." "This is career suicide," James said. Kate's laugh was harsh. "They already forced me to drop the case, reassigned me to traffic duty. I'm done protecting rich men who beat women." She set the box on James's table. "Use it. Burn him down. I'll testify to everything." The third miracle came in the form of court-ordered DNA results. Marcus had filed for permanent termination of Sarah's parental rights. Part of that process required establishing biological parentage. The results arrived on a Tuesday. Emma was not Marcus Brennan's biological daughter. Probability of paternity, 0%. James stared at the results for a full minute before calling Owen. "We need to talk to Sarah, now." At the hospital, Sarah explained through tears. "Daniel Porter, my childhood sweetheart. We reconnected 2 years ago when my marriage was falling apart. Dan wanted to leave his wife. I wanted to leave Marcus. We were planning to run away together." She twisted the hospital blanket in her hands. "Then Dan died. Car crash on the Pacific Coast Highway. 14 months ago. I was 8 weeks pregnant. I thought about ending the pregnancy, but I couldn't. It was all I had left of him." "Marcus knew?" Owen asked. "He did a private DNA test when I was 6 months along." "That's when everything got worse. He was furious that I'd cheated, that I was carrying another man's child. The night he beat me," Sarah's voice broke, "he kept screaming that I'd humiliated him, that he'd erased the evidence of my betrayal." James felt sick. "He tried to kill you and the baby because Emma wasn't his. And now he has custody of a child that isn't even biologically his," Owen said. "That custody order just became worthless." James filed an emergency motion that afternoon. 48 hours later, he stood in front of a different judge and presented the DNA results. "Mr. Brennan has no biological claim to this child. My sister is the only legal parent. I'm filing for emergency custody as Sarah's brother and Emma's uncle." Marcus's lawyers fought back, but they had no ground to stand on. The judge ruled in James's favor. Emergency custody is granted to James Coleman pending Mrs. Brennan's recovery. Owen picked Emma up from Marcus's house personally, with police escort and cameras rolling. Marcus stood on his mansion steps, watching his last piece of leverage disappear. "You think this changes anything?" Marcus called out. "I'll destroy all of you." Owen held Emma close and smiled. "You already tried. How'd that work out?" For the first time in weeks, the brothers had hope. They had evidence. They had witnesses. They had Sarah's testimony waiting. They had Emma back. Now they just needed to make sure the entire city was watching when they brought Marcus Brennan to his knees. Owen Coleman had learned something important during his 20 years as an investigative journalist. The most powerful weapon wasn't evidence. It was narrative. You could have all the facts in the world, but if you couldn't make people care, those facts died in filing cabinets and forgotten databases. Marcus Brennan had controlled the narrative for months. Grieving husband, devoted father, philanthropist facing false accusations. Owen was going to take that narrative and detonate it. The podcast was scheduled for 8 p.m. on a Thursday. Tech Ethics with Owen Coleman had been running for 3 years, usually pulling 50,000 listeners per episode. For this one, Owen leaked just enough information to make it interesting. Major tech CEO discusses ethics, leadership, and public responsibility. Marcus's PR team begged him to do it. You need image rehabilitation, his publicist insisted. Owen Coleman is respected, serious journalist. This isn't some tabloid hit piece. It's your chance to look transparent and thoughtful. Marcus agreed because his ego demanded it. He'd spent weeks being attacked in whispers and carefully worded news articles. People crossing the street to avoid him. Investors taking meetings then canceling. He'd go on Owen's podcast and show the world who he really was. Brilliant, misunderstood. The victim of a vendetta by two brothers who couldn't accept their sister's tragic accident. The studio was small but professional. 2 chairs, microphones, cameras for the video feed that would stream live on YouTube. 2.3 million people tuned in, more than Owen had ever polled. Marcus didn't know that number included every major news outlet, 3 senators, the FBI's white-collar crime division, and 10,000 domestic violence survivors who'd been following the case. Owen started gentle. Thanks for being here, Marcus. Let's talk about ClearSight AI. You've built something revolutionary. What drives that innovation? Marcus relaxed into his prepared answers. Technology, vision, making the world safer through facial recognition. 15 minutes of softball questions. Marcus was charming, articulate. He'd done 1,000 interviews like this. You're also known for philanthropy, Owen continued. 5 million to domestic violence prevention after your wife's accident. What motivated that? Sarah would want something positive to come from tragedy, Marcus said. Perfect answer. Practiced in mirrors. That's generous. You clearly value giving back. Let's talk about values. Your company's entire model is built on control, identifying people, tracking them, knowing where they are. What happens in your philosophy when someone says no? Marcus paused. The question felt like a trap, but he couldn't see the mechanism yet. People need structure, he said carefully. Guidance. Society functions on agreed-upon rules. And when someone breaks those rules, your rules, there are consequences. That's how systems work. Owen leaned forward. Like your wife needed consequences? The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Excuse me? Marcus's smile was frozen. 7 women, 7 different NDAs, all with the same story, same pattern of injuries, same threats if they talked. What were the consequences for them? Marcus's publicist stood up in the corner. We're done here. Sit down, Marcus snapped. His mask was cracking. I can handle this. Owen kept going. Detective Kate Wilson will testify that you had police reports deleted. Vanessa Clark will testify that you beat her until she lost your baby. My sister is awake, and she'll testify about 2 years of systematic abuse. So I'll ask again, what are the consequences when someone says no to Marcus Brennan? You don't know what you're talking about. Marcus's voice was rising. Sarah was mentally unstable. Vanessa is a bitter ex-employee making up lies. We have recordings, Marcus. We have financial records. We have 7 women ready to testify. Some people need to be corrected, Marcus exploded. He stood up, yanking off his microphone. They don't know what's good for them. You think you can sit there and judge me? I built this city. I made it what it is. Ungrateful people like you. Ungrateful? Owen's voice was ice-cold calm. My sister is in the hospital with permanent brain damage because you beat her while she was pregnant, and you want gratitude? She was carrying another man's child. She humiliated me. Marcus stopped, realized what he'd just said. The cameras were still rolling. 2.3 million people had just watched him admit that he knew Emma wasn't his biological daughter, that Sarah's infidelity was his motive. Owen smiled. "Thank you for that confession. I think we're done here." Marcus lunged. Security grabbed him before he could reach Owen. The feed cut, but it was already too late. The clip was viral before Marcus made it to his car. 47 million views in 24 hours. Hashtag arrest Marcus. Brennan trended #1 worldwide in 11 minutes. But Owen wasn't finished. The podcast was just phase 1. Phase 2 began at midnight. Owen's tech team, 3 former hackers he'd worked with on previous investigations, had spent weeks infiltrating ClearSight AI's security systems. At 12:03 a.m., every screen on the side of the ClearSight headquarters building lit up. 40 stories of glass and steel transformed into a massive projection screen. The footage showed Marcus screaming at employees, throwing a laptop at an assistant's head, security camera footage of him dragging Sarah's unconscious body from his car into their house on the night of the attack. Traffic stopped on Wilshire Boulevard. Crowds gathered. Everyone with phones out, recording, streaming, sharing. Police arrived within 10 minutes. Tried to shut it down. Owen's team had planned for that. They'd routed the projection through 17 different servers across 8 countries. Police couldn't trace the source, couldn't cut the power without blacking out 6 city blocks. The footage played for 3 hours. By dawn, it had been viewed 83 million times. Phase 3 launched at 6 a.m. Sarah, propped up in her hospital bed, gave her first public statement. Owen had helped her write it, helped her practice until her voice didn't shake. "My name is Sarah Coleman," she said, looking directly into the camera. "My husband, Marcus Brennan, beat me into a coma. Your city helped him cover it up." She detailed everything. The deleted police reports, the judges who'd ruled in Marcus's favor despite evidence, the systematic corruption that had protected him for years. "I'm alive. I'm speaking. And I'm not stopping until everyone who protected him faces consequences." The video was everywhere within an hour. By noon, 10,000 people had surrounded Marcus's Beverly Hills estate. Domestic violence survivors, advocacy groups, families of Marcus's other victims. They came with candles and signs and testimonies of their own. Justice for Sarah. Believe survivors. Arrest Marcus Brennan. Police set up barricades but didn't disperse the crowd. The optics were too dangerous. The media coverage too intense. One wrong move and it would be national news for all the wrong reasons. Marcus was trapped inside his mansion, watching through security cameras as his world collapsed. His phone rang constantly. Board members resigning, investors pulling funding, partners severing ties. By evening, Phase 4 was ready. Owen's expose published simultaneously in the New York Times, Washington Post, and The Guardian. 6,000 words, 23 sources. Vanessa's recording transcribed in full. Financial documents showing $400,000 in bribes to Judge Carson, $2.1 million to police and prosecutors over 5 years. The FBI raided ClearSight AI at dawn on Friday. Agents seized servers, files, computers. Executives were let out in handcuffs. ClearSight's stock crashed 84% in a single trading day. Board members resigned en masse. The company that Marcus had built over 15 years dissolved in 72 hours. Saturday morning, Marcus held a desperate press conference. He stood on the steps of his mansion, surrounded by lawyers, facing a crowd that hated him. "These allegations are lies, fabrications by competitors trying to destroy me. I'm the victim here." The crowd started chanting, "Murderer! Murderer! Murderer!" 10,000 voices in unison, deafening. Marcus tried to continue speaking, but his voice was drowned out. He looked at the faces in the crowd, saw the rage, the certainty, the complete absence of doubt. He understood then. The narrative had shifted permanently. He wasn't the victim, he was the monster, and the city wanted blood. That night, Marcus Brennan made a decision. He couldn't win in Los Angeles. The city had turned against him. The media, the public, even his own board. But he had money, resources, connections in other countries. His lawyers started making calls. Private jet fueled and ready at Van Nuys Airport. Destination? Dubai. No extradition treaty. A fresh start where his money still meant something. He'd leave everything behind, the company, the house, even Emma. He'd rebuild somewhere else. Somewhere people didn't know his face. Marcus Brennan was running. What he didn't know was that Owen Coleman was 3 steps ahead, and the trap was already set. Marcus Brennan's private jet was fueled and ready at Van Nuys Airport. Destination, Dubai. No extradition treaty. He made it as far as the boarding gate. Then his phone buzzed. A message from his lawyer. Sarah died at the hospital. You need to return immediately to finalize custody transfer of Emma's body for burial. Marcus stared at the message. Sarah was dead, his final loose end tied off. And Emma. He'd take custody of the body, control the funeral, control the narrative one last time. His ego couldn't resist. He changed his ticket to a commercial flight back to Los Angeles. Private jets were being tracked. What Marcus didn't know was that the message was fake, sent by Owen from a spoofed number. Sarah was very much alive, and 200 reporters were waiting at LAX. The FBI was waiting too. Marcus walked off the plane in a Tom Ford suit, designer sunglasses, still believing he was in control. The handcuffs went on before he made it 10 steps. Cameras flashed. Questions shouted. Marcus's face twisted in rage and panic. This is illegal. I have rights. You can't do this. Owen stood into the crowd. When Marcus's eyes found him, Owen shouted loud enough for every microphone to catch it. So did Sarah. The clip went viral instantly. 47 million views in 24 hours. Marcus's face at the exact moment he realized he'd lost everything. The trial took 3 months. It was televised. The whole country watched. Sarah testified first, showed the jury her video diary, 47 clips over 2 years, each one more damning than the last. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of Sarah's recorded voice. He said if I ever left, he'd destroy me. I believe him. Today he locked me in the bedroom for 8 hours because I suggested we go to therapy. I'm 7 months pregnant and I'm so scared for my baby. By the end, half the jury was crying. Vanessa testified next. Details of evidence tampering, bribes. The recording of Marcus confessing, the beating that cost her a pregnancy. Detective Kate Wilson testified about the disappeared reports. The captain who ordered her to drop the case. The systematic corruption that protected Marcus for years. Defense tried to fight, claimed Sarah was confused, that Vanessa was a scorned mistress, that the evidence was circumstantial. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. The sentencing hearing filled the largest courtroom in Los Angeles. Marcus Brennan stood in an orange jumpsuit, hands shackled, while Judge David Collins read the verdict. On 7 counts of domestic violence, attempted murder, obstruction of justice, and witness tampering, this court sentences you to 25 years to life in federal prison. But that wasn't all. Additionally, you are ordered to pay $89 million in restitution to Sarah Coleman. All assets are to be seized and liquidated. Marcus's empire, built over 15 years, dissolved in an afternoon. Clearsight AI was sold for parts. The Beverly Hills estate auctioned. Cars, art, investments, everything. Sarah received $89 million. She immediately donated $60 million to domestic violence organizations. I don't want his money, she said. I want his victims to have resources I didn't have. But Marcus wasn't the only one who faced justice. Richard Hayes, Marcus's attorney and fixer, was convicted of obstruction of justice and conspiracy. 12 years in federal prison, disbarred. His wife filed for divorce. His children refused to visit. Judge Patricia Carson was impeached after federal investigators uncovered $2.4 million in bribes over 8 years. 8 years in prison. Pension revoked. Police Captain Brooks was forced to resign and convicted of official misconduct and evidence tampering. 6 years in prison. The corruption ran deeper than anyone imagined. Vanessa Clark received immunity in exchange for her testimony. Witness protection. A new identity. Her final video statement went viral. I was complicit in protecting a monster. I'm spending the rest of my life making amends. Detective Kate Wilson was promoted to lieutenant, started a task force specifically for domestic violence cases involving wealthy defendants. In 3 years, conviction rates increased by 340%. Sarah's law passed in California 6 months after the trial. It criminalized evidence suppression in domestic violence cases, made it a federal offense for officials to delete or hide DV reports. James Coleman was elected district attorney in a landslide. His entire platform was built on reforming how the system handled domestic violence and holding powerful abusers accountable. Owen Coleman won the Pulitzer Prize for investigative journalism, used the prize money to create a foundation called Silent No More. It helped expose 47 other abuse cases over 5 years. He married Kate Wilson 2 years after the trial. And Marcus? In year 3 of his sentence, Marcus was attacked by another inmate, the father of one of his other victims. The attack left Marcus blind in one eye and partially paralyzed. He spent the rest of his sentence in a wheelchair, dependent on guards he'd once looked down on. Parole denied. 5 times, no visitors, no letters, no one who cared whether he lived or died. The man who'd terrorized the city became a forgotten number in an orange jumpsuit. 5 years later, Sarah Coleman stood on a stage in front of 2,000 people. The Domestic Violence Awareness Gala was held annually now. Sarah's foundation, the Emma Project, had helped 12,000 survivors escape abuse. Emma, now a healthy 5-year-old with her mother's eyes and her biological father's smile, sat in the front row between James and Owen. She had no memory of Marcus. She knew only that her mother was strong and brave and helped people. Behind Sarah, on a massive screen, was Marcus Brennan's mugshot. Below it, one word: convicted. Sarah wore a blue dress. Her hair was longer now. She'd remarried 2 years earlier to David Morrison, a pediatric surgeon who'd helped save Emma. They had 2 more children, a life rebuilt from ashes. She looked out at the audience. Survivors, advocates, families, people who understood what it meant to escape hell. 5 years ago, Sarah began, I was a woman who believed silence would keep me safe, that if I just stayed quiet, managed his anger, loved him enough, I'd survive. Her voice was steady, strong. I was wrong. Silence protects abusers. Speaking up saves lives. She gestured to her brothers in the front row. My brothers refused to let me be silenced, even when I was unconscious. They didn't just seek justice. They terrorized a corrupt system until it had no choice but to hear the truth. The audience was silent, hanging on every word. Marcus Brennan didn't just abuse me. He abused his power, his wealth, his city. He bought silence from judges and police and politicians. He made himself untouchable. Sarah's voice grew stronger. But my brothers learned something important, and I want every survivor here to know this truth. No one is untouchable. Money can't buy back your name when the whole world knows what you are. It can't buy silence when 10,000 people are screaming your crimes. It can't buy freedom when your own city demands you rot in prison. The standing ovation started before she finished. To every survivor watching, your voice is a weapon. Use it. Tell your story. Don't let anyone convince you that power protects predators forever. Because I survived hell, and I dragged my abuser straight into it. 2 minutes of applause. Sarah embraced her brothers. Emma ran into her arms. Kate and Owen held hands, tears streaming. Behind them on the screen, Marcus's mugshot faded, replaced by photos of the 12,000 survivors the Emma Project had helped. Faces of hope, of healing, of lives rebuilt. In a federal prison 300 miles away, Marcus Brennan sat in a wheelchair in the common room. The news was showing coverage of Sarah's gala. An inmate changed the channel. Nobody wants to watch your ex-wife, man. Marcus stared at the blank screen, forgotten and powerless. The most terrifying revenge wasn't violence. It was truth that couldn't be silenced. It was a monster dragged into the light and destroyed by the very people he tried to break. It was 2 brothers who loved their sister enough to burn down a corrupt system and rebuild it stronger. James Coleman continued his work as district attorney, prosecuting domestic violence cases with a fury that made defense attorneys nervous. Sarah's law expanded to 14 other states. Owen Coleman's foundation grew. Silent No More became a national movement. Survivors found their voices. Abusers found themselves exposed. Sarah Coleman traveled the country, speaking at colleges and conferences and shelters, telling her story, giving hope to those who thought escape was impossible. Emma grew up knowing her mother was a warrior, that her uncles were heroes, that speaking truth to power wasn't just brave, it was necessary. The city that had once protected a monster learned to protect its victims instead. And Marcus Brennan, the man who thought money could buy anything, learned that it couldn't buy back a reputation, a legacy, or a single moment of the freedom he'd stolen from so many others. 5 years after his arrest, a reporter tried to interview him for a retrospective piece. Marcus refused, not because he was ashamed, but because no one cared what he had to say anymore. The final word belonged to Owen in his Pulitzer-winning article. They called him untouchable, said money could buy anything, even murder. But we proved something that every abuser needs to hear. The truth doesn't negotiate. Justice might be slow, but it's patient. And when it finally arrives, it doesn't just convict you, it erases you. Marcus Brennan built an empire on fear and silence. Two brothers and one survivor tore it down with nothing but truth. He terrorized one woman. They terrorized an entire city into watching him fall. That's not revenge, that's a reckoning. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please reach out. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24 hours a day at 1-800-799-7233. You are not alone. Speak up. The world is finally listening.